On episode 223 of the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, we speak to strategy expert Rosie Yeo, and she's going to tell you 5 simple steps on how you can create a powerful strategy for your organization. That's right, folks. It's all about strategy today. Are you ready for this? All right, let's do it. Welcome one, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, a weekly podcast series dedicated to helping you hit peak performance across the 3 domains of leadership. Those being leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. This podcast couples my 20 years of military experience as a senior Canadian Army officer with world-class guests to bring you the most complete podcast of leadership going. And for more, feel free to check out our website at movingforwardleadership.com. And with that, let's get to the show. Yes, welcome one, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. It is your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy, and it's so good to be talking to you today. And if you're listening real time, you'll realize that I did something. I pitted 2 things against each other this month. I pitted culture and strategy. That's right. Last week we were talking about culture if you're listening in real time, and I would heavily suggest you go back and check out my interview with Mark Monchek, all about creating a culture of opportunity. But today we are going to be talking to strategy expert Rosie Yeo, and she's going to be talking about how you can create a powerful strategy in uncertain times. And I'm going to give you a hint of something. There is an interesting common denominator between these 2 interviews. There's an interesting thing that these 2 interviews have in common. And if you haven't listened to Mark's interview, then you should go back and check that one out at leaddon'tboss.com/222-222. But anyway, today's episode with Rosie, we talk about things such as how to create a powerful strategy, how to create a great strategy session to plan it out, 5 steps to creating that powerful strategy, some small actions that can lead to large strategic wins, how to empower strategic conversations with our team members, and a whole whack more. It is loaded with strategy today. Rosie knows that good leaders know strategy is vital when it comes to organizational longevity, right? If you don't have a good strategy, your organization is not going to last. That is why she is here. She is active in her role in helping organizations plan strategy sessions, execute on strategy sessions around the globe, and especially in Australia, where she's at. So this topic is uber important. We've seen organizations, big businesses fall because of a lack of execution on their strategies. So this is super important. It's important to not only just big businesses, but you small business owners out there who are listening, or you, the middle manager, right? Because your team could have a strategy about how you're going to go about executing on your organization strategy. And you can take these lessons and apply it. Don't go, oh, I'm just a middle manager, or, oh, I'm just a small business owner. This isn't applicable to me. It absolutely is. Us as leaders, we need to be thinking strategically all the time. And then finally, I'll tell you there is a great linkage between strategy and culture that has been brought out here in this. And it goes back to the last episode, as I mentioned. So there you go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's enough of me. So why don't you sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation about creating a powerful strategy in uncertain times with Rosie Yeo. Rosie, welcome to the show. So good to have you here.
Hi, Scott. Great to be talking with you.
So, last week's episode, I had someone on the show talking about culture, and they started off with the famous quote, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." As a strategist, I want to know your take on this one right now to kick the show off.
Oh, look, I have a mate who's fantastic culture expert, and we have this discussion over and over again. I totally believe that strategy actually has to be encapsulated in culture. You don't just separate the two because a really successful strategy is one that is lived and breathed in the organization. So they're absolutely intertwined, and that's like choosing between your favorite children.
Yeah. As a parent, I know you don't want to do that.
You're not
As a
allowed, Scott.
father, I didn't sign a contract on that one, did I? Oh wait, yeah, yeah. As a dad of two sons, yeah, there's no favorites. They're both my favorite. Equally, I love them equal, just sometimes not as equal,
Hmm.
depending on who and when of the day. But anyway,
Hmm.
no. So actually, interesting point. He basically said the same thing after the fact. He said culture and strategy do need to come together, and especially in the this disruption we've gone through in the past. How many years? Like really, like two for COVID, three for COVID. Now there's some issues before that. Now we got like brink of World War III kicking on our
Hmm.
door, all this other stuff. So a little bit of disruption going on in the world. So his point is culture, strategy do need to come together. However, what he was saying was that if we embody it, as a culture, then the strategy kind of comes along for the ride. But I think you're probably going to say something around the inverse.
Look, I would probably look at it. I mean, first of all, a lot of people talk about strategy and then point to something on the bookshelf and go, yeah, that's our strategy. It's over there. I'll send you the document. That's not that's not powerful strategy. That's a document and people can't actually quite remember what it says. Strategy at its heart has to be based in that sort of shared ambition that everybody understands in the organization and signs up to. So starting off with that core purpose of what you're really there to try to achieve over the long term is the core of strategy. And when you think about it, as you're thinking about what your organizational culture is, a key part of culture is everybody understanding what that core purpose is and working towards that. And if you understand the core purpose, then all of a sudden your values are clear, your priorities are clear. It just makes it a lot easier to have those conversations and make, you know, challenging decisions and keep moving through uncertainty and through change.
So we got values, we got purpose that are part of a powerful strategy.
Yep.
What else is in there?
So I would say that if you really want to create powerful strategy, there's three things that you absolutely need to blend together. And the first is information. So obviously we need information, we need data, we need analysis, and you need to have a sort of not just have the information, but understand what that information means. But that's often where people stop. They set a strategy meeting, and the first half of the day is just chock full of PowerPoint presentations about all the stuff you've done or what the landscape looks like and all of that. That's all fine, but it's not enough on its own because creating strategy is about painting a path to a future that doesn't yet exist. So if something doesn't yet exist, we actually have to invent it for ourselves, and that requires imagination. And sometimes people sit back and go, that's so fluffy. It's not fluffy, it's essential, because you have to blend this information with imagination and creative thinking. And then if you blend those two things with that really clear idea of what your ultimate core purpose is, that's how you create powerful strategy, because you know where you're trying to get to in the long term. You understand what all the various elements are. You've got the information there. You understand what that information means for you, and you've started to think differently about how to bring it to life.
So you're saying 120 PowerPoint slides is not the right way to kick off a strategy session?
Okay, find me someone who says, who sat through 120 PowerPoint slides and agreed that that was a great day. I mean, the it's so funny
Right.
because, it just is not part of, because I facilitate a lot of strategy meetings. y- There's an art to having the meeting so it doesn't feel like every other meeting. Because if a strategy meeting feels like every other meeting, same room, same process, same discussion points, the ideas are going to be the same as well. You're going to be having the same conversations. I often encourage organizations to start thinking about, okay, marshal all that information, but get it to people first and then spend the first part of your strategy session. You still need to think about what it means, but you don't need to just, repeat all the data, up front. Like, get it out first, have the powerful conversation about what does that mean for us now? What have we learnt? What have we changed our minds about over the past year? And then let's look forward. What does it mean for how we plan for the future?
Love it. Absolutely love it. I like that that ideology. We need to make the session feel different than the other meetings.
Hmm.
And you might be a bit biased in this question. I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you think it shouldn't be the leader or the senior leaders of the organization actually facilitating and running that session? Should it be someone else? Now, I say you're obviously going to be a bit biased because this is what you
That's my
do,
business. Yeah.
but right, that's your business. Of course, you're going to go, yeah, for sure. But could the leader, let's say the CEO, say, hey, let's grab middle manager Joe or Jane down there in sales and bring her up and say, obviously educate her a little bit and say, this is what I want you to do is facilitate it. Could that be a good strategy or tactic, I will call it, to the strategy?
So I would say, there's a couple. If I step back, when I think about why organisations hire me as a facilitator to do strategy, there's a few different buckets they fall into. Sometimes someone hires an external facilitator because the organisation is having some challenging issues and it is difficult for people to speak together, or there's some underlying issues going on, and they need someone to take the heat out of it. That's one way. There's challenging dynamics going on in the organisation. But sometimes organizations actually do it simply because they're high functioning teams, and the CEO and the chair and the senior leaders actually want to be part of the conversation. And whoever's running that process and running the meeting, that's not the same as being in the conversation and, an active participant, because you do kind of have to stand a little bit aside from it and make sure you're sort of heading in the right direction and pulling everybody in. So a lot of the times that's why people bring me in. So I absolutely think there is a role for bringing someone in, either, obviously externally or internally. The trick is that, particularly for a strategy conversation, it can't be someone who's just there keeping time. Like, if you bring a junior manager in who's sort of a little bit in awe of some of the senior managers, they're not going to be able to manage the conversation and help the organization ask the tough questions and actually drive into decision making as well. But there's certainly a role for bringing someone who's still, involving someone who's very senior, but maybe in the next division, or, maybe there is one member of the board who's experienced in leading these kind of conversations. I think, they can be tough going as well, when you're trying to juggle a certain amount of uncertainty in a conversation. You know what it's like. And I remember, particularly when I was, back when I was sort of starting to facilitate strategy sessions, there's always a moment in a meeting where you kind of look around the room, you think about all the ideas that are on the table and all the different views. And there's always that moment of going, oh my gosh, how are we going to bring this together? How are we going to land this with a clear consensus at the end of the day? And I think one of the most powerful things you can do as a leader of that sort of discussion is to just be comfortable in some uncertainty. You actually have to let that uncertainty go for a little while. You can't jump in to try and make everybody agree right away and move on. That's not a constructive conversation. The diversity of views is a really powerful part of trying to figure out the right way forward. That was a
Oh,
long-winded
I
answer,
love.
wasn't it?
No, that was fantastic. I've had longer, let me tell you. Uh,
Okay, well, now
uh,
you've given me something
but
to aim for. No.
no, no. uh, but I really like how you wrapped it up, and that is, the diversity of our views is, basically where we want to go, and in looking at that, and then finding a direction to go from that. Now, with that, obviously there's conflict that arises, as you hinted at, and heated discussions. There might be a lot of, basically drama, skeletons in the closet, right? Hatchets that have been buried or not so buried or semi buried, and everything else in between. So, how, as the leader that's looking at this, how can we get our team to get past this crap and actually go, okay, let's go, let's get into this. Our organization needs this because, as I started the show with, we're in a time of uncertainty. VOCA, as we like to call it. So actually, I don't know if you follow me, but by day I'm a senior Canadian Army officer, right? So
Hmm.
volatile, ambiguous, complex. No, and I forget the A off the top of my head. But anyway, the point is, it's chaos, right? And that's the environment we live in. But congratulations, welcome to the world too. So we can't allow all this bad stuff in the background to hamper the organization, because guess what? Lives depend on it. Our people's lives depend on it. Our livelihoods depend on it. We need to get the strategy right to keep the organization breathing, moving forward, growing, etc. So, how do we get all that crap out of the way so we can actually get towards the goods?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, just on process for a moment, often when people start talking about, yes, we need to do a strategy session, let's do our 3-year plan or whatever, the first thing they always ask is like, which framework should we use? Let's choose a framework. And I understand that because it gives certainty, but sometimes using a complex framework can really work against you. One of the reasons why I first got into facilitating strategy is because I was a director on some boards, and we'd roll into the strategy meetings, and these complex strategy frameworks would be wheeled out that people would have to walk through during the meeting. And I used to just shake my head because there'd be like a 20-minute conversation about, but are we talking about a goal now, or should this be determined as an objective? Like, and there was all this definitional stuff going on. I always find that the simpler the process you use, the more powerful the conversations can be. So it really is about focusing on the quality of the conversation and keeping the outline process as simple as possible. Because when you think about it, like strategy, it's literally about thinking, where are we right now? Who are we? Where are we right now? Where are we trying to go? What's our shared ambition? And then let's think about that pathway. What's going to stop us? What's going to help us? And then from that conversation, okay, what are the key things we need to do, the keys to success that we need to focus on? And then let's decide what those next steps are and move ahead. So I think just having a really clear framework for your discussion, it helps everybody walk the same journey with you. That's the starting point. I also think providing enough time, and when you talk about the quality of the conversations, providing that time and space for people to actually have the conversations is really important, because we forget that there actually does need to be a level of trust and goodwill if you're trying to make big decisions and take a leap beyond what you're doing right now. I mean, you wouldn't jump in a plane if you didn't know the pilot was actually qualified. And we sort of expect people to come into a senior team and go, yes, we're all with you, we're going out there. And if they haven't had the time to actually build that level of trust in the intent and the expertise of their fellow travelers, it's really difficult to get people to commit to a big leap. Now, that doesn't mean you all need to be best friends, but it does mean you need to trust the professional expertise and give people the time to, so you can be aware of what their understanding is, what their perspective is, and build that shared agreement.
That's awesome. So, I really like the simple framework. As I
Hmm.
said, I'm an army guy. Simple's embedded in me, right? Like,
Hmm.
you give me something complex, my eyes glaze over, my eyes roll in the back of their head, I drool on myself, and nothing happens.
We need simplicity. We need more because the world's complex enough as it is. Like we,
Absolutely.
you know what I mean. So another level of complexity, but at the same time, as you talked about earlier, you need to be creative, and complexity kills creativity. And 18 step strategy building session is not something where you're going to get too super creative, but rather, maybe a 4-step process or a 3-step process or whatever. Could be it could
Five
drive that,
steps.
and 5 steps. Here we go.
5 steps
So on
works.
that note, all right, what are these 5 steps according to Rosie Yeo that that they should jump into?
Look, they're the ones I mentioned before. You start with where are we? Then you talk about, and that includes, what's our environment look like now? What have we learned? What have we changed our minds about right now? And then you look to the future. What are the things that what are the accelerating changes in our world and around us? What are the things that are not going to change? And then what's our, be clear about what your shared ambition is, whatever your time horizon is that you've set. Normally people talk about 3 years, 5 year horizon. I've done some 20-year horizons. I think in the past 2 years, most people have been, a lot of my clients have just been, no, we just need to focus on the next year. We can't look ahead, but that's another issue. So set that step 2 is look to the future. And then step 3 is that figuring out, what are the hurdles and enablers to success, taking a broad brush approach to all the elements that might hinder us or enable us. And then out of those, work out the ones that are most significant. And out of that, you will find some keys to success, the things that if you get right, you will succeed. And out of that, then you can start thinking about, okay, well, for each of those keys to success, what are the big things we need to do to achieve it? And the one thing I always ask people to do as well, even if you don't have time, you're not doing a whole implementation plan, for each of those elements that you think, the key strategies that you're walking away with, just say, what is the first step for each of these we need to take tomorrow to bring them to life? Because all of a sudden that makes it real, because we all fall into that habit of being quite general. We need to build great relationships with our stakeholders. Yeah, that's fantastic, no one's going to argue with that, but what on earth does that actually mean? You've got to unpick that. Right, so you know who are those stakeholders? What do they think about you at the moment? What does improving your relationship look like? What's going to change? And then all of a sudden, if you've got that, at least that first step, like the first step is right. We actually need to, change the way we communicate. These are our top 5 stakeholders. This is how we need to change our communication with them. Or, this is what we're going to do. We're going to organize a forum with them, whatever it might be. So just that last step of just at least coming up with some extremely tangible first steps help people go beyond generalities.
I love the tangible first steps,
Hmm.
and that really jumped out at me as I read your book, Go for Bold,
Hmm.
um, because that's how I coach as well. It's like, hey, you know, what can you do right now to push you towards your goal right
Yeah.
now, like today, tomorrow time frame, right? What's something you can do? And a lot of people are like, holy, it's funny the amount of people that actually get shocked by that question. It's like, no, like, what's a tangible thing? Like, oh, I want to improve communication in my team. Okay, great. What's something you can do right now? Right now, like literally as we get off this call, for you to start improving communication. And the funny part of it is often people have no idea. There's like, oh, and I think that's the reason why they go to that general route, because they
Hmm.
don't know what to do. And then it's like, okay, well, this is where, I get paid. So like, okay, let's start, start asking some questions. Okay. So where do you feel you're lacking, and, what have you tried in the past, and blah, blah, blah. So, but that's
Yeah.
what really jumped out at me.
It's powerful. I mean, I've used it. I use that. It's not everything, but having those tangible questions can be really helpful on a number of fronts. I mean, I was working with an organization, an industry organization. They've got real challenges with attracting staff, and particularly bringing in younger staff, and particularly coming out of COVID. And so, everybody talks about, yes, it's, we've got to change the workplace and all of this, but all of a sudden, just asking them 2 questions. I know a guy, Eric, who's 50 years of age and has had a really rough time over the last, in this sector. What can you do in his workplace to ensure that he still has a productive and satisfying work life over the next 10 years. And when they came up with some tangible stuff for that, it was like, right, now there's an 18-year-old. Her name is Suri. She's about to finish high school. She's vaguely thinking of starting to work in your industry. What is one thing you could change in your workplace right now that would make a difference to her being confident to start down the track in this career, and what happens next for her? So it's not everything we've got to go big, but sometimes those tangible questions, they bring it to life, what it is you have to do.
I would argue often it's the small things we do which matters the most.
Hmm.
And those small things end up becoming those big things, right? Like, okay, how might we take care of the 50-year-old? How might we be attractive to the 18-year-old? Oh, maybe we actually go to the high schools, or we sponsor something there. Or, there's 50 million different things that they could do.
Hmm.
But then they're actually getting noticed, and now they're actually being seen, or now the employee feels respected. And oh, should not your overarching strategy, part of your overarching strategy, be employee retention? Because we are in something that's called the Great Resignation right now. So, and guess what, Canadian Army, we're feeling it too. We're feeling it too. We call it the missing middle. So
Uh-huh.
the middle ranks right now is where we've been hit the hardest. In that, we're recruiting, and yes, we're getting enough people in, and we have a lot of senior leaders, but it's those missing ones that have been in for 10, 12 years that are leaving for other opportunities. And good on them, that's their right. I'm not here to judge, but just the point is that's affecting us as well. So now we are constantly having conversations about retention and what it is, and then there's many changes coming in our workplace to potentially help the retention issue. But it goes to your point, small things add up to big things.
Mm. And I think you're right. And I mean, I think some of the reconfiguring we're seeing or reevaluating we're seeing of people, I think there was a tendency to go, yeah, it's the millennials. Millennials want to feel about purpose, but it's not that. It's actually all of us have had that time to think about what it is we want to do. Like what difference do we want to make, and are we actually proud of the organization we work for, and what we do? And again, that just leads into everyone in your organization needs to have that clear sense of what your core purpose is in the organization, and that shared ambition needs to be understood and signed up to across the organization.
Now, with that shared ambition, shared vision, intent, which of course obviously gets tied to strategy,
Hmm.
it takes a lot of conversation, especially for the listeners out there who come from big organizations. So at one point, I led an organization of 200 members. I was in charge
Hmm.
of it. 200, 200 members. And like, it took a lot, like, to explain and constantly pushing my mission and our vision and all this stuff that I had for that squadron. And saying, this is where we're going. This is how we're going to get there. This is why you right there, Corporal so and so right there, working that desk. This is why you're important to that. It takes a lot. So from your standpoint, how can we get our team members talking about this in a meaningful way, in more than just the strategy sessions? Because it can't be a one and done. We can't just
No,
show up, have a strategy session, and be like, okay, put it in the
all
book.
good.
We're done. We're good.
Yeah, particularly because things change. It's it's like you can set a strategy, but strategy can't be set in stone because guaranteed something's going to change along the way. So we're constantly, I think, leaders have to constantly see strategy through these two lenses. So one of them is that long-term lens. You absolutely need to know where you're going in the long term, but then there's also that short-term lens about how do you help people in your organization maintain a strategic mindset. So, how do they make decisions in the short term and day to day? It's sort of in the chaos of all whatever's going on and whatever gets thrown up at you that day, while still maintaining that sense of, ultimately we're still going. That's where we're still going long term. And I think one of the things I talk about in the book is that we can encourage everyone to build a more strategic mindset by simply encouraging 3 different behaviors in our teams and in our organizations and asking 3 different questions. And the behaviors I talk about are like look up, look around, and lock in. And what that means is that, by looking up, you're encouraging people to, psychologists talk about that fact that when you sort of look up or out to the horizon or up into the stars, you actually begin to think in a different way because you enter, the state of abstraction where your sort of mind is more open to more complex things. So just giving people, encouraging people all the time to ask, what if? To wonder, to imagine how things could be different, to think creatively. And then the second element is that looking around. So encourage your people to not just focus on what's right in front of them, take that 360-degree view. So if you're trying to solve a problem, don't just think, what would I do? Because this is the way we've always done it. Give them again that space to start thinking about how would someone do it if they were more sort of artistically bent, or what would an engineer, what approach would they take, or how's an entirely different industry responded to this kind of this challenge? So just asking what about a little bit more often, thinking a bit more broadly, really helps you come up with more options for solving things. And then, of course, the third behavior, lock in. Like, strategy ultimately is about making choices. We have to always choose what matters most. And this is where the short term and the long term combine, because when you're making decisions about what to do now, that what matters most conversation is also about how is this contributing to our long term, our shared ambition. Is this going to get us further down the way? Sure, there are some zigzags along the way, but is it helping us get to that long term decision? And just by encouraging people, on your everyday meetings to have that conversation. If you've got weekly work in progress meetings, ask at the end of the meeting, what matters most? Are the things we're talking about now, are they getting us to that longer term objective? And if they're not, there better be a good reason why, there could be a good reason why you're doing them right now. But they may, but it's always helpful. And I think encouraging particularly up and coming leaders to try and ask those 3 questions more often, you get a more rounded approach and you get more strategic decisions being taken.
Love it. Absolutely love it. What I hear from you is it comes down to a lot of, prioritization and making sure those decisions are actually linked to the strategy and the goals that you've set out in the first place. Because
Hmm.
if you're not working towards that, then what are you doing really? Why are you doing that? Because it's not linked towards what your desired, what we refer to as desired end state, where we
Hmm.
want to be at the end of the operation or whatever we're going through.
And I
and
think
and
it's
that's how we
interesting.
think.
Yeah, because
Go ahead.
I mean, I think particularly now, everybody's been, there's been so much immediate upheaval that, it's understandable that everybody's kind of fixed on how do we adapt, how do we do stuff right now to just keep going because we keep getting curveballs. But I went hiking recently down in South Australia, and it's interesting. I was sort of thinking that, we knew we were going to go to a mountain sort of off there in the distance. We could see that mountain we were going to, but on this particular day, we were actually walking through a dry riverbed, and it's pretty rough and uneven. It's just stones on this dry riverbed. And I was kind of thinking it's a bit like strategy. So if you're just walking along the dry riverbed, stumbling over these stones, that's all you can see. All you can see is that you keep walking, straight ahead on this uneven ground. But if you know and you keep sight on the fact that there is that mountain you're getting to, all of a sudden your gaze changes, because yes, you can keep going through the dry riverbed, but you might also look up and see there are other pathways. There might be another way that goes sort of through the ridge onto the left, or there might be another, I shouldn't say left, should I? Not to a military guy. Should be able to go due north or due, I don't know. Someone was guiding our path. I wasn't finding the way. But it's interesting to think about it from that perspective, because all of a sudden the long term view is relevant every day.
Wow, that's a great way to begin wrapping up this conversation. I've really appreciated that last bit. And yeah, you're absolutely right. We do need that longer term perspective so that we can see what's coming, so that we can have, plan, prepare for it. But at the same time, have a good idea of where we're going,
Hmm.
general idea of how we're going to get there, but available to make those course corrections as we go. Because I often use an analogy. If a pilot takes off from New York, I usually use London, but let's go with Sydney because you're on here. He just sets course for Sydney and then sets it on autopilot and leaves it alone for probably, I would say, 18 hours. Do you think he's actually going to end up at Sydney? No. There's probably about 100 or so micro corrections along that way. Yeah, he knows where he's going or where they're going in order to get there, but there's micro corrections along the way. There's might be a detour due to a thunderstorm in the area, etc. And if you're just like, oh, autopilot set, head down, I'll read my book for the next 18 hours, you're not going to make it. So I really like that.
I love your
Rosie,
analogy
this
too.
has been Rosie, great conversation. As we wrap up here, I do got a couple last questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
And the first question is a question I ask all the guests here at the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. As according to you, Rosie Yeo, what makes a great leader?
I think a great leader is someone who not just has a vision for where you're going to get to, but actually has that shared vision with their team. They're actually in that walking alongside together. They all know where they're going.
Ooh, that's nicely said. I'm not sure if I had anyone say it quite that way before. So I really like that. Well done. And final question of the show. It's all about you. Shameless plug. How can people find you? How can they follow you? Be part of your journey? Whatever you got going on, let us know.
All right. Would love to people follow me. Go to obviously connect with me on LinkedIn, Rosie Yeo, YEO. If you want to find out more about my book, it's goforbold.com.au, and that will also get you to my website too, where there's plenty more information as well.
And for you, the listener, it's easy as always. Just go to leaddon'tboss.com/223, and the links are already in the show notes. So you can grab them without having to worry about it. All right, Rosie, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.
I definitely enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks, Scott.
And that's a wrap for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. But you know what you could do to truly support the podcast? And no, that's not leaving a rating and review. It's simply helping a friend. And that is helping a friend by sharing this episode with them if you think this would resonate with them and help them elevate their performance level, whether that's within themselves, their teams, or their organization. So do that. Help me, help a friend. Win-win all around. And hey, you look like a great friend at the same time. So just hit that little share button on your app, and then feel free to fire this episode to anyone that you feel would benefit from it. Finally, there's always more. There's always more lessons around being the highest performing leader that you can possibly be, whether that's for yourself, your team, or your organization. So why don't you subscribe? Subscribe to the show via movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. And until next time, lead, don't boss, and thanks for coming out. Take care now.